The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
Welcome back to the Cooner Report. This is Jeff Cooner, Boston's bulldozer. 617-266-6868 is the number. We are now joined by the one and only Waleed Shoebat, international expert on terrorism, Mideast expert. You've heard him here before. You love him. Waleed, thank you so much for coming back on the Cooner Report.
You bet. Thank you for having me.
Waleed, we're going to be breaking some news here very soon in terms of what's happening with you and the harassment it appears, by the government. But before we get into that, you have been writing some brilliant, insightful, devastating blogs on Shoebat.com, where you say that following the Syrian civil war, you're quite convinced that the chemical weapons attack, which now Obama says requires an American military response, you believe was not committed by the Assad regime, but in fact was committed by the rebels themselves. Am I accurate?
That is correct.
Why do you think that?
Well, if you look at several investigations done in Syria, even by the Syrian government, in which they reveal several warehouses that were captured that has chemical weapons, one in Shoebat, one in Banyas. We've had this scenario before in Khan al-Asal, in which the United States accused Syria of the same thing, and you had United Nations inspectors who stated, who know what they're talking about, stated that it was the rebels who used it. Doctors, witnesses. There isn't a single, doctor in Syria that would say, "Oh, yes, it was the government had used it." They've treated many cases in Khan al-Asal. Then you have a case. The Turkish government itself, a few months ago, have captured 12 terrorists from al-Nusra, in which they found 2 kilos of sarin gas. So the chemical was caught on the hands of terrorists. The Russian government demanded and made a great case regarding this issue and demanded that the Turkish government give more information on the issue, which they refused to do so. You have even a Nusra terrorist. We have showed the recording of a Nusra terrorist telling the Syrian army, if you get to come closer or to even become victorious against us, we're going to use chemical. We have even recordings in which rebels were shooting chemicals and saying, loading one sarin, casing on the recording. So if the government talks about capturing recording by the Syrian regime discussing the issue of sarin gas or using gas, well, we have the same thing on the rebels. But even the question regarding what the government has is questionable. The Syrian government itself wanted to examine whether it was, because when the attacks happened, the Syrian government wanted to examine, make sure that none of their soldiers have used any chemical weapons. They've looked into it, and there is so far, no evidence, no smoking gun. In fact, even Cameron himself, Great Britain, during the debate in the parliament, says we don't have a smoking gun, even though he's arguing for the attack against Bashar al-Assad. He says we don't have the smoking gun. Is there any government official in the United States that could say we have the smoking gun, that the government, the Syrian regime, have used chemical weapons? So, we've had this kind of thing happen when Saddam Hussein supposedly was building weapons of mass destruction, and we've attacked Iraq. Do we have any evidence of weapons of mass destruction? So this is not the first time. We cried wolf before. Now we're crying wolf again, and we're not examining ourselves as a country. We are the greatest country in the world. We should know better whether we have the smoking gun or we don't have the smoking gun.
We're talking with... Sorry, Waleed, go ahead.
No, that's fine.
We're talking with Waleed Shoebat, international expert on terrorism and the Middle East. Waleed, let me ask you then this question, and it's the $64,000 question.
Yes.
If it looks like maybe the rebels were the ones that used the chemical weapons attack outside of Damascus, and we know that they have chemical weapons, and we know that they've used chemical weapons in the Syrian civil war, why is Obama hell-bent on dragging this country into a war that Congress doesn't want and the American people don't want?
Well, why did we go to war with Saddam Hussein? It was the interest of Saudi Arabia. You have prominent individuals who say the same thing. Joseph Bodansky, Even Rush Limbaugh discussed what Joseph Bodansky stated, that the CIA even worked with the Turkish government, the Saudis, possibly the Qataris, and knew in advance that the FSA had and will land these chemical attacks as well. You know, you have Dale Kalvik of the Associated Press writer talked about Prince Bandar and the Saudi government. So we are doing the bidding for the interest of the Saudi government. This has been historically true when it comes to the Middle East. The Saudis are very much afraid of Iran and its constituency, which is in this case, you know, Hezbollah, you would have Syria, and they want to convert that specific region into a Sunni alliance. And so it is within the interest of Saudi Arabia to remove the Alawite government, which is run by Bashar al-Assad, the son of Hafez al-Assad, in which they want to establish a Sunni rule. This is the interest of Turkey as well. Saudi Arabia is terrified of Iran. Saudi Arabia is terrified of the Shiites. This has been a divide, historical divide, of immense proportion historically that will never end. We're getting ourselves involved in a war, involved in a strife that we shouldn't be involved in. We're not looking at the struggling of the Christians in Syria. Go to the village of Malula, population 5,000. Look what the Free Syrian Army, the rebels, are doing there to the Christians. They are terrorizing them. They are threatening them whether they convert to Islam or get beheaded. You know, who is talking about Ma'lula? Who is talking about the Christians of Syria? You name me one Christian in Syria who will tell you Bashar al-Assad is persecuting them. They will all tell you that the Free Syrian Army, the Al-Qaeda-like operatives in that region coming from all over Timbuktu of the Middle East, whether they come from Libya, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and any part of the Arabic world, they all come as an influx into that nation to remove Bashar al-Assad, to establish an Islamic state. No matter what you look, if you look at McCain's task force he's talking about, the Syrian Emergency Task Force, it's been known that several of their operatives support the Muslim Brotherhood. They support the Islamist regime. Some of the members were part of MSA, dealt with the ISNA, AMC, Abdul Rahman al-Amoudi, who's in prison. Those are the kind of elements that we're working with, supposedly, to aid the Syrian rebels. And this is the pride of McCain and the pride of Obama, of all these so-called, secular movement in Syria. There is no secular movement in Syria. The largest terrorist organization that is operative is al-Nusra. It is Al-Qaeda. It is considered a terror state officially. The State Department recognizes al-Nusra as a terror state. We are aiding and abetting terrorism. So we don't have a war on terror. We are aiding terror. So we have to ask ourselves, why are we aiding terror? It has to be for ulterior motives of the service to Saudi Arabia. We've made a deal with Saudi Arabia historically that we will always defend and do the bidding for Saudi Arabia, and that's what we're doing. If indeed President Obama cares about genocide and the massacring of people and humanitarian rights, why does he not look towards the government of Sudan? In fact, it was President Obama who stopped the president of Sudan from defending themselves from northern Sudan. The Islamist part of northern Sudan attacks the Christian part in South Sudan. Look into that issue and see how much President Obama stands with the Christian south of Sudan. He is against it. If he wants to really do some justice, go no further. Go visit his brother, Malik Obama, who aids and abets the government of Sudan. He is officially the executive director of the Islamic Da'wah organization, a terror state. This is a job working with terrorists. In fact, the Egyptian government itself has filed cases against President Obama's brother with evidence showing that President Obama's brother aids and abets the terrorists.
Now, Waleed, this is very important because it's going to lead to what I think is going to be a news-making interview right now. You have been one of the few brave, courageous scholars and writers in this country, Shoebat.com, where you have been documenting President Obama's brother and his ties to radical Islam and terrorist organizations. You've just touched on it a little bit now. For the American public, for the audience of Cooner Country, can you explain to them what is going on with Obama's brother and what are his ties to radical Islam?
The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.